Ever since Generation 3, you've been able to encounter wild Pokémon holding items. Some of these combinations feel a little contrived, just a way to find more copies of rare items, but others tell fascinating stories about the behavior, environment or biology of Pokémon. There are also a ton of nifty little nods and references among the long list of wild Pokémon capable of holding items, and even a few weird inconsistencies or mysteries that makes you wonder what went on in Game Freak's head when deciding these. Speaking of which, we will unfortunately be forced to look mostly at older generations, because ever since the move to the Switch, Game Freak has severely decreased the amount of wild Pokémon holding items. For example, the only Gen 9 Pokémon programmed to hold them are the Toadschool line and the Paradox Pokémon, which may factually be a lot of different Pokémon, but are really just two instances. Sword and Shield similarly had a lot less Pokémon capable of holding held items than Sun and Moon. Anyway, enough about that. Let's dive into the wonderful world of wild Pokémon's held items. We're gonna start with the wealth of information about Pokémon's biology and lifestyle revealed through these items, specifically with these two shiny gems, the Star Piece and Comet Shard. Now, looking at the list of Pokémon that can hold them, you may think these items are from outer space. Pokémon like Clefairy, Solrock and Lunatone, Staryu and Minior can all be found holding these items in the wild, and all of these Pokémon have extraterrestrial origins as revealed in their Pokédex entries. But look deeper into the two shards and you'll find that while, yes, they are from outer space, you may not have realized how exactly they came down to Earth. Let's begin with the Star Piece. Generally speaking, there are three ways for you to obtain this item through natural means. You find it on the beach, you find it on Wild Staryu, or you find it in ancient locations, like ruins, caves, or Sinnoh's underground. How did it get there? To answer that question, we first need to ask another. What is a Star Piece really? Its name may suggest it's a piece of a star from the night sky, but this is just a piece of a red gem. Stars aren't anything like that. They're balls of fire, like our familiar sun, so that cannot be it. No, the star this is a piece of is definitely extraterrestrial, but it's no object. It's a Pokémon. Staryu, in fact, also known as the star-shaped Pokémon. A Star Piece is a piece of Staryu and Starmie's red gem, which they can most likely just regrow themselves like the Pokédex explains they can do with limbs. Another entry mentions that Staryu's gem sparkles in the night, which the item is also said to do according to its description. Looking at it through that lens also makes it completely understandable why Star Pieces can be found on beaches, which is where Staryu lives, or in ancient locations, where we may be looking at the remnants of the Pokémon, effectively fossilized. In fact, Star Pieces can be regularly found in the same place as fossils in the games, like the aforementioned Sinnoh Underground. But what about its more expensive brother, the Comet Shard? That one is blue after all, and while comets definitely aren't blue either, neither is Staryu of course. Well, not normally, that is, because shiny Staryu and Starmie actually do have a blue gem, one that resembles the color of the Comet Shard pretty closely. It would also immediately explain why the Comet Shard is rarer and more expensive. I don't need to tell you how uncommon shiny Pokémon are after all. And as for the other Pokémon holding these items, well, Staryu are still from outer space, so perhaps more of their gems can be found there. The other Pokémon that commonly hold these items also often live in what I described as ancient locations, so perhaps they found them lying around there and felt their extraterrestrial energy. It's hard to say for certain, but I don't think it contradicts my belief of the origins of these items. We're gonna go from one Pokémon shedding his gem to others shedding their skin, with the Shed Shell. Ever wondered which Pokémon shed their skin in the wild? Well, you're in luck, because this item informs us of this, which is information about the Pokémon's biology the Pokédex usually leaves out. There are a total of 6 Pokémon families that can hold these items, most based on different animals. First you've got Venomoth, Beautifly and Dustox, all moth or butterfly-like Pokémon of course. Real-life moths do actually shed their skin as well. I'll spare you the images for my queasy folks out there, making you wonder why Pokémon like Frostmoth or Volcarona can't hold this item. Butterflies actually do not, but maybe it's a reference to cocoons, or it's simply to create a balance between Dustox and Beautifly. Perhaps the most famous skin shedders are snakes, which is exactly why Seviper can hold this item. But interestingly enough, Arbok or Silicobra cannot, even though cobra snakes very much do this practice as well. Next are Scraggy and Scrafty, who are literally the shedding Pokemon, so that's a match made in heaven. And Finally are Goomy and Sliggoo. Snails typically don't shed their skin, but they do shed their shells, so that may be the inspiration there. That said, Goomy doesn't have a shell, so how exactly that's supposed to work, I have no clue. We have a very similar item to continue this train of thought on, being the lagging tail. This item is implied to be a dropped tail, which is a practice performed by some real-life lizards, for example. They lose their tail when fleeing, but it later grows back. 3 Pokemon families can hold this item in the wild, being Slowpoke, Lickitung, and Cufant. Slowpoke isn't really a big surprise. Its tail is an actual plot point in the Johto games, and it growing back is mentioned in several dex entries. For Lickitung and Cufant, as well as their evolutions however, this is completely new information. I can believe Lickitung pretty easily. It's such a weird looking Pokemon, any random weird thing could make sense, but Cufant and Copperajah? Elephants don't exactly lose their tails much, and in fact both the real animals and the Pokemon barely have any tails to speak of. These Pokemon holding lagging tails might be related to the description of the item, which explains it's very heavy, just like the Cufant line. Also a bit of an appetizer for several inconsistencies to come later, but this item's design is clearly based on Onix's tail, yet it cannot be found holding this item. Weird decision. Next I want to take a look at the Light Clay, which is only held by Pokemon made of or strongly associated with clay. This includes Golett and Baltoy, which are Pokemon with similar origins. Golett and Golurk are golems as found in Hebrew legend, statues of clay that have been brought to life. Baltoy is a Shakoki Dogu, a Japanese clay doll, get it? Supposed to represent a spaceman. Hence the association with light clay. Both Pokemon are made of it. The item can also be held by Wild Mudbray and Mudsdale, but for them, the clay probably just stuck to them after playing or galloping in it, as these Pokemon are known to do. We're moving on to those dastardly inconsistencies and unexplained mysteries proper now, beginning with a weird fact concerning the Everstone. We all know what this item does, right? It prevents Pokemon from evolving while holding it. So in that case, can somebody explain to me why Wild Graveler, Boldore and even Gigalith can hold these items? How did they ever become like that while holding an Everstone? I suppose it is possible they grabbed onto them after evolving of course, but I personally would have thought it to be a nice little reference if only base form Pokemon were able to hold Everstones in the wild. Another interesting conundrum, I guess is the word, can be found while looking at Oricorio. These birds of course come in 4 different forms, which can be altered between using different colors of nectar. The forms that can be found in Paldea, the Bale and Pom-Pom styles, can hold their own nectar, which was actually not possible in Alola. But weirdly enough, when Kitakami was added, and with it the other 2 Oricorio, those 2 cannot hold their own nectar. It's a strange inconsistency, one we might see fixed in the future if all Oricorio can be found simultaneously again. Another example of why doesn't this Pokemon hold this, an even more egregious one if you ask me, is the Magnet. If you had to pick one Pokemon out of 1,000 plus, which would you say should hold the Magnet? Maybe Magnemite? Or Ton? Well, for one game, Game Freak agreed, because only in Fire Red and Leaf Green can Magneton be found holding magnets. In every subsequent game, this is replaced by the Metal Code. Side note, check out my video on the hidden lore of evolution items after this for more information on the crazy implications of the Metal Code, as well as some additional held item lore concerning the King's Rock and Hariyama and Hawlucha. Anyway, no magnets for Magneton for some bizarre reason, but there is another Pokemon that inherited the magnet as its own held item, Nosepass. And if you haven't paid too much attention to their biology, that may seem like a weird combination, but it actually makes perfect sense. Nosepass's nose is magnetic and always points north, see Legends Arceus. As such, it attracts nearby magnets with its nose, explaining why it can be found holding the item despite it seemingly having no association. I here at Pichupedia am asking the assistance of the public for the following mystery. It's technically a weird inconsistency, but unlike the previous ones, I feel like there are lore reasons or implications for it, I just can't figure it out. It concerns the 2 Pokemon lines that are the embodiment of trash, the Grimer and Trubbish families. These Pokemon are consistently shown or described as living in garbage dumps or digging through trash cans, but some of their held items seem very out of place in that case. Both lines could be found holding nuggets up until Gen 5, after which Grimer and Muk switched to the more appropriate Black Sludge, while Trubbish and Garbodor held on for one more generation until eventually switching to Silk Scarfs. Both Nuggets and Silk Scarfs are luxury items worth a lot of Pokédollars, so why are these Pokémon apparently fighting them in the trash? What's the implication here? I could see the Silk Scarfs maybe being a reference to tourists forgetting their scarves while on holiday, considering the regions where these trash bags hold Silk Scarfs are Alola and Galar, which are heavy on tourism. But that still doesn't explain the Nuggets, those really leave me baffled. If you have any theories, share them in the comments, I'll pin the one I like best. And then finally, some neat little references or nods found among Wild Pokemon's held items. Let's start with a very simple and obvious but effective one. Snorlax and Munchlax are the only Pokemon who can be found holding leftovers. I'm honestly surprised these two even leave leftovers, you'd think they finish their food. Another fairly obvious but still neat one is Shelder, Cloyster and Clamperl holding pearls, which is a nod to real life oysters occasionally containing pearls. There's also the Metronome, not the attack, but the item that is based on the real life device of the same name that helps musicians keep their rhythm. This can be found held by the Kricketot line and Chatot, all three Pokemon associated very strongly with music. Sandile, Krokorok and Krookodile can be found holding black glasses, which is actually a rare game reference to the Pokemon anime, where Ash has a Krokorok and later Krookodile who wears black glasses. It suits their dark type as well, of course, but that goes for all dark Pokemon, and yet these three are the only ones to hold this item. And finally, I feel like I can't talk about Wild Pokemon's held items without mentioning what I would consider the coolest of them all, the Leader's Crest. A very recent addition from Gen 9, it can be held by Bisharp to indicate they are the leader of a group of Barnyard. Defeating 3 of these Bisharp with your own will cause it to evolve into King Gambit. It's such a cool concept. Maybe I was a little too harsh on how modern games treat held items on Wild Pokemon, huh? Anyway, that's it from me. Again, let me know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I will definitely be reading them. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.